Ever had a feeling that something wasn't real, yet it felt completely real to you? Everything you see, hear, and feel is nothing but your brain's interpretation of reality. But what if, because of a tiny malfunction, the brain started showing you a world that isn't real, yet feels more real than the one you live in? This is Bryan Charnley, an artist from London who suffered from schizophrenia. At first, his art consisted abstract ideas, shapes, and patterns. But then, he started painting himself. As schizophrenia progressed, each portrait got more strange and more heartbreaking. Bryan kept a diary beside his paintings to explain what each portrait meant. But the deeper he went, the darker those pages became. And this was his final self-portrait. He took his own life the same day he completed it. To understand what goes on inside the mind of a schizophrenic, you must first question your own reality. This is the third case written in Dr. Diary, and tonight we will open it. Every day, the brain gets flooded with lots of information. From reading daily newspaper, listening to radio, meeting people, to endless thoughts we carry inside. The human brain knows what is worth paying attention to, so it forgets most of the information. I don't remember what I had for supper last night, or what time I left the house yesterday. Yet, I can recall the conversation I had with my friend last week. My mind chooses what matters and filters out the worthless information. But in the schizophrenia patients, the brain starts paying attention to every single thing, meaning the brain begins to treat everything important. The filter that once ignored useless details is gone. A random license plate number seems like a lottery winner. A cloud formation looks like a divine message written in the sky. A flickering light bulb looks like it's sending a signal in the secret Morse code. The mind begins to find patterns, logics, and hidden meanings and keeps misinterpreting the reality. Our brain since childhood is trained to close gaps, to make sense of incomplete information. If a person hears rustling leaves, the mind fills in the gap, guessing it was probably an animal. A small guess which is quite harmless and is life-saving in some cases. In schizophrenia, this gap filling goes into overdrive. Every uncertainty gets filled, but with misinterpretations. And if the genetic push is present, the brain doesn't just guess. It begins creating things out of nothing. That means a random shadow isn't just a shadow anymore. The brain misinterprets it, and suddenly we see a figure standing there, as real as anything else in the room. Initially, it can be controllable, because you know that Queen Elizabeth won't walk into your house. What's terrifying is losing the grip of reality. Internal voices whispering, arguing, shouting, or giving orders, as if it's a completely different person in your head. Sometimes it's multiple voices mocking each other, or mocking the person constantly, passing cruel remarks, insults, or even commands. What we call quiet can feel like a crowded room in their head. It's like someone else has moved in the brain and won't stop talking. I can't imagine trying to sleep, work, or even hold a conversation when in the background there's a never-ending radio which you can't switch off. And it's not just auditory. People might see faces morphing or turning into something random, like horse, or some object might appear floating in the air, or shadows forming figures moving on their own. Sometimes their mind even create whole imaginary friends, partners, or family members with whom they interact with daily, as if they were real. In many cases, they may believe some outside entity is controlling their thoughts, behavior, and actions. For example, in this painting, Bryan Charnley wants to show that a spiritual force is controlling and threatening him. They may also worry about some non-existing bizarre things, such as presence of snake inside person's intestine, making him unable to eat well. In public spaces, they might find the entire crowd staring at them, mocking or laughing at them. or looking them as if they have been charged guilty for something. They might also lose the sense of where their own mind and body end, something called as loss of ego boundaries. For example, they may believe a random pen is actually a part of their body, or feel as if their private thoughts are being broadcasted to everyone around them, as if people can read their mind telepathically. For example, this self portrait of Bryan Charnley shows a giant mouth on his forehead, symbolizing that others could easily hear his thoughts. I remember a case I read where a 48-year-old army veteran was living alone, supported by his disability payments. He reported seeing hallucinations and hearing abnormal voices for years and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. During treatment, he stopped the medications abruptly and was reluctant to mention the reason. At a later visit, he reported that his most reliable pleasure in life was a nightly gossip, with hallucinations of voices he believed belonged to 17th century French courtiers, and the chance that he might lose these conversations was too frightening for him to consider. The person may also have completely altered belief of their lives. A case where a 47-year-old divorced woman believed she was getting messages from the God and the police department to go on a mission to fight drugs. She also believed that an organized crime group was trying to stop her in this pursuit. About 10 years later, she developed the belief that the policemen were everywhere and that the neighbors were spying on her. A very popular case in the world of delusional belief is erotomania, in which a person is convinced that someone, often a celebrity, is deeply in love with them. But this belief isn't just fantasy or a wish. It is as real as gravity to the person. The patient believes the other person initiated the relationship through hidden signals like look, gesture, TV appearances, etc. For example, a scene in the movie that feels too personal. The tiny spark grows uncontrollably, and every coincidence becomes an evidence to reinforce that love. The world around them becomes a coded message system. Songs, news, articles, all secretly directed towards them. When a celebrity or person denies them, the patient rationalizes it as a cover-up to protect our secret love. I really feel sorry for schizophrenic people. They have to bear all of it for no sins they have ever made, living such life just because some genes were faulty, of which they are not guilty at all. They enter a lifelong therapy full of antipsychotic medications, which make life even worse. These medications make everything numb. It's like you aren't you anymore. You are a robot who is lifeless and soulless. The job they once had forces them to resign, as they are hardly functional anymore. The people they once had, the family members, the friends, all leave them, because nobody wants to live with a schizophrenic maniac. People think they are homicidal monsters who will go around on a killing spree. But in reality, the risk of violence is no longer than that in general population. They laugh, they cry, they dream, but the world often strips them of these moments. Coming back to Bryan Charnley, this is the first painting of Bryan, and it seems very normal. Just 9 days later, Bryan completed his second painting, a disturbing reflection of what was happening inside his mind. After reducing his medication, he began to spiral into the brutal effects of sudden withdrawal. Bryan became convinced that person living upstairs could read his thoughts and answer back telepathically, a torment he described as a mental crucifixion. The oversized rabbit ears capture his hypersensitivity to human voices, while the swirling green lines represent the vibrations he believed he was emitting. Bryan completed his third painting just 3 days later, and at first glance it looks unfinished. He could no longer sit and focus for long periods. This painting shows how he felt everyone around him had ESP, the ability to read his thoughts. That's why he drew crosses over his eyes. Bryan painted this piece the very next day. The red spots on the brain are not paint, but his own blood, which he used to show the mental torture he was going through. Pipe showed he was smoking heavily. He had drastically reduced his medication since the first portrait. This is the fifth self-portrait of Bryan. He began feeling a strange spiritual force was warning him to not smoke, or else he would face a disaster. He threw his tobacco pouch away, yet the spiritual force didn't change. Under desperation, he took enormous dose of medication, nearly 15 tablets in one day to fight those spiritual forces. And therefore, his fifth painting looks much better than the previous ones, as his condition seems to be stabilized. After his intense psychotic episode, Bryan returned to his original dose of medication. He believed people, especially strangers, were targeting him with cruel remarks. Few days later, he again reduced his antidepressant medication. So he started losing his sleep, and his mind began racing uncontrollably because antidepressant medications made him sluggish. He felt like his thoughts were being broadcasted for everyone to hear. To express this feeling, he painted his brain as a huge mouth, symbolizing that his thoughts were spilling out without control. The nail in the mouth symbolizes his inability to speak or socialize normally, which makes him feel isolated and targeted by others. This heartbreaking portrait was one of the last paintings he drew. He's saying that he's exhausted from trying to make people understand his feelings. The blue color shows his depression, caused by cutting down his antidepressants again. Then he goes on painting few more portraits to show his mental condition. He is angry about how people admire Picasso for using symbols in his art, but dismiss his own work as bad technique. On top of that, people constantly remind him of his past mistakes, while he knows nothing of theirs. This makes him feel powerless and exposed, like the empty X in this painting. He includes Van Gogh's cross in this painting, a reference to Van Gogh's final suicidal painting, to express how suicidal he feels himself. Then again, a similar portrait, showing the same problem. This is the final portrait. There is no note in his diary this time. He ended his life on the very same day he painted it. At first glance, the picture may seem unfinished, and perhaps it is. But even in its rawness, it reveals exactly how he felt in those final moments. Schizophrenia is much more than just a disorder. It's a wide spectrum with a distinct experience for every ill person. But few things are common in all of them, like poverty, expensive medication, lack of social support, hopelessness, depression, and a constant struggle to separate reality from hallucinations. As a society, the least we can do is to lend them a hand of support.